It started with a petty fine from our neighborhood's HOA. My wife had left our holiday decorations up a week too long, and the HOA's self-appointed enforcer, Karen, was relentless. She demanded payment immediately and threatened escalation. My wife, tired of the nonsense, ignored the fine. Karen's response? She called the cops. She wanted us taught a lesson. When the officer arrived, he knocked on our door with a mix of authority and hesitation. But the moment my wife answered, his face changed completely. His jaw dropped, his eyes widened, and then came the words no one expected. "Judge, it's you?" Turns out, my wife wasn't just a homeowner. She was a respected judge in our county. The officer immediately realized he'd been dragged into a frivolous dispute, one that could backfire on Karen for wasting police resources. The tension dissolved instantly, and Karen was left red-faced as the officer apologized to us and gave her a stern warning about abusing emergency services. From that day on, Karen stopped her crusades, and the HOA learned a valuable lesson. Not every fight is worth picking, especially when the law isn't on your side.
The power of perspective is one of the most important lessons we can learn when it comes to resolving conflicts, especially those that seem small at the start but have the potential to spiral into something much larger. Far too often, people allow ego, emotion, or a sense of authority to take control, and in doing so, they escalate situations that could otherwise be solved with a little patience and understanding. When you think about the story of a homeowners association fine turning into a police matter, it becomes clear that perspective was the missing ingredient. To the HOA enforcer, the fine was a matter of rules and order. To the homeowner, it was petty and unnecessary. Without either side stopping to look at the situation through the eyes of the other, conflict became inevitable. Education about perspective starts with recognizing that every individual carries their own set of values, priorities, and experiences that shape how they interpret events. What seems urgent to one person may seem trivial to another, but neither viewpoint is inherently wrong. The key is learning to step outside of your own frame of reference long enough to acknowledge someone else's reality. In psychology, this is sometimes described as cognitive empathy, the ability to imagine what another person is thinking or feeling. By practicing this, we reduce the likelihood of seeing disagreements as personal attacks and instead approach them as differences to be understood and worked through. Consider the HOA situation again. From the enforcer standpoint, rules exist for a reason, and ignoring a fine felt like a challenge to the system. From the homeowner standpoint, the rule felt unnecessary and the enforcement overly aggressive. Without perspective, both sides dig deeper into their positions, one doubling down on authority, the other digging in on resistance. With perspective, however, the conversation might have been different. The HOA could have asked, "Why is this fine being ignored? Is there a deeper issue here?" The homeowner could have asked, "Why is this rule important to the HOA? Is there a community benefit I'm not seeing?" Those questions open a door to dialogue instead of conflict. Perspective also teaches us that not every battle needs to be fought. In many cases, what appears to be a violation is not actually harming anyone. When we step back and ask ourselves, what is the real cost here? Is this worth my energy, my stress, or the resources of others? We often realize that escalation is unnecessary. The police officer in the story understood this instantly. He saw that being called out for a minor HOA dispute was a misuse of his time and authority. That shift in perspective put the entire situation in its proper place, something petty that did not deserve the weight it was being given. Beyond personal disputes, perspective plays a huge role in building stronger communities. A neighborhood where people look out for each other and show flexibility will always thrive more than one where every minor infraction becomes a battleground. Perspective fosters compassion, and compassion leads to cooperation. When people choose to listen first, they discover that most conflicts are not about winning or losing, but about being heard and respected. The educational takeaway is that perspective is not passive. It is an active skill we must practice. It requires curiosity instead of judgment, patience instead of haste, and humility instead of pride. Teaching ourselves and others to pause, consider the other side, and weigh the true importance of an issue can prevent countless arguments from ever escalating. It not only keeps peace in our homes and communities, but also models for future generations how to approach challenges with wisdom instead of hostility. In the end, perspective is the bridge between conflict and resolution, and without it, even the smallest disputes can become mountains.
The dangers of misusing authority extend far beyond the immediate inconvenience they may cause. When people wield power irresponsibly, whether that power comes from a formal position, a set of community rules, or simply the ability to call upon law enforcement, they chip away at the trust that holds a community together. Authority exists to maintain order, protect safety, and ensure fairness, but when it is misapplied to settle personal scores or enforce trivial matters, it becomes a tool of division rather than unity. In the case of an HOA member escalating a small fine into a police matter, the harm was not just the wasted time of the officer, but also the message it sent, that authority can be weaponized against neighbors over matters that should have been solved through dialogue. To truly understand the danger, we need to reflect on why authority is granted in the first place. Communities empower certain individuals or organizations with authority because there is a collective need for structure and problem solving. For example, law enforcement officers are entrusted with authority to protect citizens, respond to emergencies, and ensure laws are respected. Homeowners associations are given authority to manage shared spaces and uphold standards that benefit the collective good. These roles only work when the authority is applied fairly, consistently, and with the greater interest of the community in mind. The moment authority is redirected toward personal agendas, its legitimacy is undermined. When someone misuses authority, the immediate result is often frustration and resentment. Neighbors begin to see those in positions of responsibility not as partners in building a better environment, but as enforcers of arbitrary power. This erodes trust, which is the foundation of any cooperative community. Over time, a pattern of abuse can create an atmosphere of hostility, where residents are more focused on protecting themselves from authority than collaborating to solve issues. Once trust is broken, it is incredibly difficult to rebuild, and people begin to disengage from community life altogether. The involvement of law enforcement in trivial matters is one of the clearest examples of the dangers of misusing authority. Police officers are trained and equipped to handle situations involving safety, crime, and emergencies. When they are called for something as small as an unpaid HOA fine or holiday decorations left up too long, their time and resources are diverted away from genuine needs. This not only weakens the community's ability to respond to real dangers, but also risks damaging the relationship between residents and officers. People may begin to see the police not as allies who protect them, but as tools for neighbors to use in personal disputes. That perception undermines the essential bond of trust required for effective law enforcement. Education about authority must therefore emphasize responsibility. Holding any form of authority is not a privilege to be exploited, it is a responsibility to be handled with care. Responsible use of authority involves proportionality, responding in a way that matches the seriousness of the issue. It involves fairness, ensuring that rules are applied consistently and not selectively. And it involves restraint, knowing when it is better to let go of a small issue rather than escalate it unnecessarily. These qualities separate true leadership from misuse of power. In addition to harming relationships within a community, the misuse of authority sets a dangerous precedent. If people see that authority can be exploited without consequence, others may follow suit. What begins as one neighbor calling the police over a minor issue can lead to a culture where everyone feels justified in using power to their advantage, creating cycles of retaliation and further division. Instead of cultivating harmony, authority becomes a weapon. The educational lesson is clear. Authority must always serve the community, not the individual. By respecting the limits of our roles and using authority with fairness and responsibility, we build a culture of trust.
When authority is misused, however, it wastes resources, damages relationships, and leaves lasting scars. Communities thrive when authority is seen as a safeguard for all rather than a tool for the few. And it is up to each person to remember that the power they hold, no matter how small, should always be exercised with integrity.
Respect over rules is a principle that highlights the importance of human connection and understanding above rigid enforcement. Rules are necessary in any structured setting, whether in neighborhoods, workplaces, or entire societies. They exist to create order, maintain fairness, and ensure that everyone understands the boundaries of acceptable behavior. However, rules by themselves are not what make communities thrive. What truly sustains healthy relationships and cooperative living is mutual respect. When rules are applied without respect, they feel oppressive. When respect is prioritized, rules are understood as tools that support, rather than dominate, the lives of the people they govern. In many community conflicts, such as disputes within homeowners associations, the clash is rarely about the rule itself. More often, it is about how the rule is enforced and the attitude of those enforcing it. A simple fine for a small infraction may not seem unreasonable on paper, but if it is delivered with hostility, threats, or condescension, it becomes more than just a fine. It becomes a symbol of disrespect. People naturally resist authority that is exercised without regard for their dignity. On the other hand, when the same rule is presented with empathy and explanation, most people are far more willing to comply. Respect softens the impact of rules and turns potential conflicts into opportunities for dialogue. Education in this area requires understanding the difference between compliance and cooperation. Compliance happens when people follow rules because they feel they have no choice, often motivated by fear of punishment. Cooperation, however, happens when people choose to follow rules because they understand their purpose and feel respected in the process. Cooperation is far more sustainable and beneficial because it builds a sense of community rather than resentment. A neighborhood where residents cooperate out of mutual respect will always be healthier than one where people comply out of fear of fines or penalties. Consider again the example of the HOA dispute. The holiday decorations left up too long could have been addressed in multiple ways. A strict rule enforcer might send a fine immediately, treating the situation as a violation that must be punished. A respectful neighbor or board member, however, might first start with a friendly conversation. "I noticed the decorations are still up. Is everything okay? Do you need help taking them down?" The difference between these approaches is not about the rule itself, but about the presence or absence of respect. One approach escalates tension, while the other builds connection. Respect also recognizes that rules are not always perfect. They are created by people, and like all human creations, they can be flawed or outdated. When people place rules above respect, they risk enforcing standards that no longer serve the community or that unfairly burden certain individuals. Respect allows room for flexibility and adaptation. It asks, does this rule serve people, or are people being forced to serve the rule? This kind of thinking ensures that rules remain relevant and that enforcement reflects the values of fairness and compassion. Another critical aspect of respect is consistency. People are quick to notice when rules are enforced selectively or when some individuals are treated differently than others. Such inconsistencies breed resentment and division. When respect is prioritized, enforcement is not about favoritism, but about fairness. Respect means treating everyone with dignity, whether they are a neighbor, a stranger, or even someone who has made a mistake. In doing so, respect elevates rules into something more meaningful. They become a shared standard rather than a weapon. The lesson here is that rules and respect should not be seen as opposing forces, but respect should always take precedence in guiding how rules are applied. A respectful approach to enforcement communicates that the purpose of the rule is not to punish, but to protect and support the community. It ensures that individuals feel valued even when corrections are necessary. Most importantly, it prevents unnecessary conflict by acknowledging the humanity of those affected. In the long run, respect is what transforms groups of people living near each other into genuine communities. It allows neighbors to trust one another, even when disagreements arise, because they know they will be treated fairly and kindly. Rules may set the framework, but respect fills that framework with meaning. Without respect, rules are hollow and divisive. With respect, rules become tools of cooperation that help people live together harmoniously. This is why in any dispute, prioritizing respect over rules is not only wise, but essential for lasting peace and unity.
When justice shows up at the door, it often arrives in ways people least expect. The moment in which authority is confronted by true integrity serves as a powerful reminder that fairness and principle carry more weight than intimidation or misuse of power. In the story of the HOA dispute, when the police officer realized he was addressing a respected judge, the balance of the situation shifted dramatically. What was meant to be a tactic of pressure quickly turned into a lesson about how justice operates beyond surface-level authority. This illustrates that in any community, genuine justice has the ability to disarm conflict, restore order, and highlight the difference between right and wrong in a way that rules alone cannot. Justice, in its purest form, is about fairness, impartiality, and the upholding of values that protect everyone. Unlike rigid authority, which can be wielded without compassion, justice seeks to balance competing interests and ensure that individuals are treated with dignity. This is why true justice resonates so strongly when it appears unexpectedly in everyday conflicts. It reveals the flaws in power plays and redirects the focus toward what is fair. In the HOA scenario, the sudden recognition of the wife's role as a judge reminded everyone involved that justice is not about ego or punishment, but about principle and responsibility. Educationally, this teaches us that justice should not be thought of as something confined to courtrooms or formal systems of law. It is a value that must be woven into daily interactions, decisions, and conflicts. When neighbors choose fairness over retaliation, they are practicing justice. When leaders enforce rules with compassion and consistency, they are embodying justice. Even small actions, like listening to someone's perspective before making a decision, are acts of justice. By viewing justice as a daily practice rather than a distant concept, people can create communities where fairness is the norm, not the exception. One of the reasons justice feels so powerful when it unexpectedly shows up is that it exposes the imbalance caused by misuse of authority. Those who misuse rules or power often assume that others will be too intimidated to challenge them. When confronted with justice, however, their tactics are revealed as shallow and unconvincing. In the case of the HOA enforcer, calling the police was meant to intimidate the homeowners into compliance. But the presence of someone who represented true fairness turned the intimidation into embarrassment. This highlights the protective role justice plays in shielding individuals from unfair treatment and giving them the confidence to resist being silenced by power. Justice also acts as a leveling force in communities. Titles, positions, and authority can sometimes create hierarchies where certain people feel superior to others. Justice, however, places everyone on equal ground. It insists that fairness applies to all, regardless of status. In the HOA dispute, the recognition of the judge's identity symbolized this balance. While the HOA member may have thought her authority as an enforcer of rules was absolute, she quickly discovered that real authority is grounded in fairness, not control. Justice reminds us that true power does not come from imposing fear, but from earning respect. Another critical educational lesson is that justice often operates best when it is proactive rather than reactive. Waiting for justice to appear in dramatic moments, like the arrival of a police officer or the intervention of a court, means allowing conflicts to escalate unnecessarily. Instead, communities can strive to integrate justice into their culture from the beginning. This can take the form of transparent decision-making, giving all members a voice, and ensuring that enforcement of rules is done with fairness. By building justice into the everyday life of a community, the likelihood of disputes escalating into harmful power struggles decreases significantly. Ultimately, the power of justice lies in its ability to outshine petty conflicts and redirect focus to what truly matters. People may try to assert control through fines, threats, or intimidation, but justice has a way of dissolving these tactics and reminding everyone that fairness is the foundation of peace. When neighbors, leaders, and even law enforcement embrace justice as a guiding principle, they create environments where people feel safe, valued, and respected. The story of the HOA dispute may seem small, but it reflects a larger truth. When justice shows up, whether through the presence of a judge, the wisdom of a fair leader, or the simple act of treating someone with dignity, it changes everything. It teaches us that while authority can demand compliance, only justice can inspire genuine trust and lasting harmony.